The airport terminal was humming with the usual noise of departure gates, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and the occasional child laughing at something only they understood. Among the sea of travelers, a young woman sat quietly by gate 42, seat ticket folded neatly between her fingers. Flight 392, New York to Denver, seat 14C. Her name was Captain Ava Hart, though the world around her didn't know that name anymore. On paper, she was just Ava, a retired Air Force pilot who had left the sky behind 2 years ago. But the sky never really left her. She looked out through the giant glass window. Beyond the reflections of the terminal lights, the silver fuselage of the Boeing 737 shimmered under a pale sunrise. The engines whispered softly as ground crews prepared it for takeoff. Ava smiled faintly. That hum, that low rhythmic vibration, always spoke to her like an old friend. It had been 3 years since her last flight in the cockpit. 3 years since the mission that changed everything, the one that left scars both visible and hidden. She still heard the static-filled radio calls in her dreams. Eagle 1, you're cleared to engage. Copy that. Godspeed. Hart. Now she was just another face in the crowd, wearing jeans, a beige jacket, and a quiet look that told of battles fought above the clouds. The boarding group B. Now boarding, the attendant called. Ava rose, slinging her small carry-on over her shoulder. She moved with the kind of poise that caught subtle attention, not because she wanted it, but because her training had shaped every step to be calm and calculated. When she entered the aircraft, she smiled politely at the flight attendants, taking note and instinctively of every sound, every click of a latch, the subtle vibration in the fuselage. Old habits. Once a pilot, always a pilot. She slid into seat 14C, aisle seat, middle of the cabin. To her left, a mother was settling in with her young daughter, maybe 5 years old. The little girl looked up curious. "Hi," she said cheerfully. Ava smiled back. "Hi there. You excited to fly?" The girl nodded eagerly. "I like the clouds. My daddy says planes are like birds." Ava's smile softened. "Your daddy's right." She fastened her seatbelt, took a breath, and glanced toward the cockpit door just for a second. Then she looked away. Not today, she told herself. You're a passenger today. Takeoff. The engines roared to life and the aircraft began its slow crawl toward the runway. Passengers adjusted their headphones, turned pages, or stared out at the receding terminal. As the jet lined up on the runway, Ava felt her pulse quicken. That old rhythm returned. The feeling of acceleration, the hum beneath her feet, the controlled violence of takeoff, and then, lift. The plane climbed through layers of morning cloud, sunlight streaming through the windows like golden silk. Somewhere over the Appalachians, the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Normal, routine, ordinary, until it wasn't." The malfunction, it started as a flicker, just a brief dimming of the cabin lights, then a small jolt. Ava noticed immediately, a micro vibration, a faint but distinct change in engine tone. Her training recognized it instantly. Something wasn't right. She glanced out the window, cloud layer below, endless blue above. The passengers around her didn't notice. The mother beside her was reading a magazine. The little girl was drawing stars on a napkin. Then the intercom cracked again, the captain's voice faintly strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with our right engine. Nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Ava's chest tightened. Right engine? She listened carefully, and she heard it. That uneven oscillation, the compressor stall pattern. She leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, counting seconds between fluctuations. "Come on," she whispered under her breath. "Talk to me." She wasn't in the cockpit, but her mind was. Her instincts were running calculations, running scenarios. If they were at 36,000 feet and losing thrust on one side, they'd have to reroute soon. Probably divert to Chicago O'Hare. But then came the second sound, one that chilled her. The engine sputtered. Then boom, a sharp thud shook the fuselage. Gasps filled the cabin. The oxygen masks didn't drop. But the sudden silence of a dying engine told her enough. She could feel the pitch adjust. A small nose dip, corrected quickly. The pilots were doing their job, but the radio chatter, faintly audible from the cockpit, made her freeze. Through the half-open door as a flight attendant entered, she heard it, static and words she hadn't expected to ever hear again. Mayday, Mayday. Flight 392 requesting emergency support. Possible engine failure, 35,000 feet. Her hand tightened around the armrest. For a moment, she wasn't passenger 14C. She was Captain Ava Hart again, and the sky had called her name. The decision. The flight attendants moved briskly, calm but clearly tense. Ava stood, pretending to stretch, but her eyes were fixed forward. One attendant turned to her quickly. "Ma'am, please stay seated." Ava nodded. "I understand. But listen, I need you to tell the captain there's a former Air Force pilot on board. Call sign Raven, he'll know." The attendant blinked, confused. I don't think..." "Tell him," Ava said firmly, voice steady, eyes sharp. "Tell him Raven's in seat 14C. The attendant hesitated, then nodded and hurried forward. Ava sat back down. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something deeper. The rush, the instinct. The sky pulling her back into its grasp. A minute later, she saw the cockpit door open slightly. A man, the first officer, peeked out, scanning the cabin until his eyes met hers. Recognition flashed across his face. He nodded quickly, then disappeared back inside. The next few moments stretched thin. The turbulence grew. The plane shuddered again. They were dropping altitude fast. Then came another sound, a deeper one, louder, from outside. Through the thin veil of cloud, Ava saw something glinting and metallic fast, and closing in. Her breath caught. 2 F-16s. They appeared like ghosts, cutting through the blue sky, banking hard to flank the crippled passenger plane. The passengers gasped, pointing out the windows. Fear filled the cabin, but Ava knew better. Those weren't threats. They were guardians. The recognition. The radio in the cockpit crackled with new authority. "This is Falcon Lead, responding to distress signal from civilian aircraft 392. We have visual contact. Stand by for escort." Ava's pulse thundered in her ears. Falcon Lead. She knew that voice. Without thinking, she stood up. The attendants too busy to stop her, and reached the cockpit door. She leaned close, enough for her voice to carry through. "Falcon Lead, this is Raven," she said quietly. The pilot in the F-16 froze mid-radio. "Say again?" "Falcon Lead, this is Raven. Repeat, Raven, seat 14C, silence." Then static, then Raven, "Is that really you?" Ava smiled faintly, tears stinging her eyes. "It's been a long time, Hawk." Inside the F-16, Captain Daniel Hawk Reeves grinned through disbelief. The woman who once saved his life over Kandahar, the legend, was sitting in a civilian aircraft now losing altitude over Nebraska. "Ma'am," Hawk said, voice breaking. "It's an honor. We've got your 6. The second F-16 pilot's voice joined in, reverent. "Copy that. Standing by. Salute to Raven." And then, as the sun broke through the clouds, both jets tilted their wings in unison, a wing salute. Not for a general, not for a mission, for her. Ava closed her eyes, hand pressed against the window. The little girl beside her watched wide-eyed. "Miss, are they saluting you?" Ava smiled softly. "Yeah, sweetheart. I guess they are." The sunlight above the clouds burned gold, casting long shadows across the wounded Boeing 737. The 2 F-16 Falcons flanked it like guardian angels, one on each wingtip, gliding, vigilant, silent. Inside, the passengers whispered prayers. The air smelled faintly of metal and fear. Every creak of the fuselage seemed louder now. But in seat 14C, Ava Hart sat calm, eyes steady, fingers lightly tracing the old scar on her wrist. She had faced worse skies. But this time, she wasn't behind the stick. She was just a passenger, or so she thought. The call inside the cockpit. Captain Miller wiped sweat from his brow. The co-pilot fought the yaw, trying to keep the aircraft level. The right engine was gone, and the left was running hotter than it should. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Civilian 392, this is Falcon Lead. We're holding formation on your wing. What's your status?" Miller glanced at his co-pilot, then at the note the flight attendant had delivered earlier. It was scribbled in firm handwriting. "Tell them Raven's aboard." 14C, he pressed the radio. "Falcon Lead confirming." Passenger Raven on board. She sends her regards. A low whistle came through the radio. Copy that, 392. Raven, roger that. You're in good hands. The escorting F-16s adjusted their positions, their silver fuselages gleaming in the sunlight. The world below stretched endlessly. Cornfields, rivers, tiny towns like patches on a quilt. Ava leaned toward the window, watching the familiar dance of formation flying. Her mind replayed old days. Missions where she led those very jets through sandstorms and chaos, where she earned that call sign, Raven. She closed her eyes. Don't you dare fall. Not today, she whispered to the plane. Into the storm as if mocking her, turbulence hit. Hard. The plane lurched. Screams echoed through the cabin. Coffee spilled. Overhead bins rattled, and somewhere a child began to cry. The captain's voice came on, strained. Ladies and gentlemen, we're entering a weather front earlier than expected. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. Ava knew better. It wasn't just weather. The F-16s were descending lower, scanning, which meant the jet was losing altitude faster than radar predicted. Her instincts kicked in. She unbuckled, ignoring the looks from passengers. The flight attendants were busy calming people, so she moved forward quietly. Steady against the shaking floor, reaching the cockpit door, she knocked once. Firm. Captain Hart, United States Air Force, permission to assist. The door opened. Inside, both pilots looked exhausted, fear in their eyes, sweat glistening on their brows. Captain Miller's eyes widened. You're the Raven? Used to be, she said. What's the situation? Right engine's dead. Fuel imbalance. We're fighting roll and drag. Chicago ATC's rerouting us, but the left engine's overheating. Ava finished for him. He nodded. She slipped into the jump seat behind them, hands moving with familiarity, scanning instruments, cross-checking trim and hydraulics. Her tone was calm, commanding. Feather the right side, reduce thrust on the left to 70% and stabilize descent at 2,500 feet per minute. You'll glide farther. The co-pilot blinked. You sure? Ava didn't even look up. I've landed worse. The skies reunion outside, the F-16s mirrored every move, adjusting formation to match her commands relayed through the cockpit. Hawk's voice came through again. Raven, we're clearing your path. You've got airspace priority. Nearest runway, Lincoln Air Force Base, 30 miles south. Ava grinned faintly. Lincoln, huh? Still remember how to roll out the red carpet, Hawk. For you always. Control's already prepping emergency vehicles. Copy that. We're coming home. The co-pilot shot her a quick look. Home? She smiled sadly. That runway saved my life once. Looks like it's about to again. The glide minutes stretched into eternity as the aircraft began its slow, deliberate descent. The F-16s flanked closer now, wings almost brushing the turbulence trails. Ava monitored the gauges. Trim it steady. Nose up 2 degrees. Keep her breathing. The plane trembled, its wounded engine groaning like a dying animal. The cabin fell eerily silent. Fear thick in the air. Then came the captain's announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We are making an emergency landing. Please follow all instructions and remain calm. Ava glanced over her shoulder through the cockpit door's small window, saw passengers clutching hands, whispering prayers. The little girl from earlier, Emily, was holding her teddy bear tight. Ava's heart squeezed. She whispered, "Not on my watch." The landing, the runway at Lincoln Air Force Base came into view, a long gray strip surrounded by emergency vehicles and flashing lights. Fire trucks waited, their sirens off but engines roaring, ready. Ava took the controls lightly, just stabilizing. Easy now, she murmured. Keep descent at 1200. Reduce thrust to idle, the nose leveled. Wind howled across the fuselage. Gear down. The co-pilot flipped the switch. The familiar thunk-thunk-thunk of landing gear deploying echoed. Flaps 30. Hold her steady. Outside, the F-16s broke formation and soared ahead, clearing the path. One dipped a wing. The salute before separation. All yours, Raven. Hawk's voice said softly. Bring them home, Ava's eyes glistened. Copy that, Hawk. See you on the ground. Touchdown. The ground rushed up fast. Ava's voice dropped into a calm rhythm. That same tone she used in combat missions. 500, 400, 250. Flare. Hold. Hold. Thump. The plane kissed the runway, hard but straight. Tires screamed, smoke erupted, and the cabin erupted into gasps and cries. Sparks Sparks flickered beneath the right wing, but the plane stayed aligned. Ava braced the controls. "Reverse thrust, now!" The co-pilot complied, and the aircraft slowed, rolling to a stop halfway down the runway. For a moment, silence. Pure, deafening silence. Then cheers. Tears. Applause. Ava leaned back, exhaling slowly, as adrenaline faded from her veins. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't touched real flight controls in years. But muscle memory never forgets. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with awe. "You just saved 241 lives." Ava smiled softly. "No, we did. The sky just gave me another chance to serve." The salute outside, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. The passengers were evacuated, hugging each other, some crying, some still in shock. The little girl, Emily, ran up and hugged Ava's leg tightly. "You're a real pilot," she said, eyes wide. Ava knelt down. "Once upon a time." Then, above the noise of fire trucks and engines, came the thunder of afterburners. The two F-16s roared overhead, low and fast. As they passed, they banked sharply in perfect unison. Wings tilted. A salute from the sky. Every head turned upward. The sound trembled through hearts. Ava stood still, wind whipping through her hair, watching as they vanished into the clouds. One last call came through her earpiece. Hawk's voice. "Raven, you're still the best in the sky. Lincoln Tower thanks you for the assist. The Air Force owes you one." Ava smiled faintly. "Just keep them flying safe, Hawk. Always. Until next time, ma'am." Static faded. Silence returned. Epilogue. Hours later, after the chaos settled, Ava sat quietly on the empty tarmac, watching maintenance crews tend to the crippled plane. The captain approached her. "I read about you once," he said softly. "Operation Silent Horizon, Afghanistan. You saved 6 pilots that day." She shrugged gently. "That was a long time ago," he smiled. "And today you saved a lot more." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the horizon, at the setting sun streaked with pink and gold, and whispered to herself, "Once a pilot, always a pilot." Then she stood, picked up her small bag and walked toward the terminal. Another passenger once more. But somewhere far above, 2 jets streaked through the clouds, their pilots smiling, remembering the legend they had just saluted. Raven, seat 14C.